widely considered as the first rock and roll song of all time, and Rocket 88. We have the pleasure of, with this discussion with music biographer Peter Guralnick, author of Sam Phillips, The Man Who Invented Rock and Roll. And Peter, you have another book out that might be interesting to our listeners about the birth of rock and roll. Give yourself a promo for that one.
Well, no, we chose to celebrate, with Jerry's help, we chose to celebrate Sam's 100th in another way, too. And Colin Escott and I wrote, and Karen Gerhardt edited, a book called The Birth of Rock and Roll, which is an illustrated history of Sun. Now, the thing is, I should warn any listeners that they better get in shape if they have any plans to buy or to read the book. It's an extremely heavy book, but it is just a beautiful book, and that's thanks in large part to Karen Gerhardt, who edited it, and also to Jerry, who contributed so many of the illustrations from the photographs from the Phillips family archive. But we tried to cover the whole thing in a way that I think Sam would have just loved, because it's not heavy in any way in terms of, even though Colin has written so much about Sun, and I have too, it's not heavy in any way in terms of its approach. It's just really what Sam would call big fun. And both the illustration, I think Jerry will testify to this, Jerry Phillips. But in terms of both the illustrations and the text, too, I think is a freewheeling text. And so we had a great time. I'd known Colin Escott for 40 years. We certainly collaborated in terms of our knowledge, but we never worked together before, and it was great doing it. He wrote his parts of the book. I wrote my parts of the book, which were the 70 songs that I wanted to use to tell the history of Sun, because it was its Sun's 70th anniversary, it was. And so that's what we did, but it was lots of fun. But it is really, you have to lift weights if you want to read that book.
Awesome. Now, let's go beyond here, the part of the roster that the world knows: Elvis, Jerry Lee, Charlie Rich, Carl Perkins, Cash, and Roy Orbison. Let's drop a few names of artists and producers he recorded with, and to make it interesting, one or two sentences only about these. Okay, they brought what they brought to Sam's table. Cowboy Jack Clement.
Well, Jack was the first outside employee of Sun. He came in with Billy Lee Riley, with a demo by Billy Lee Riley, or an acetate by Billy Lee Riley, to have it mastered. And he and Sam hit it off, and they began a lifelong association and a lifelong friendship.
Howlin' Wolf.
Howlin' Wolf was, as Sam said, when he heard Howlin' Wolf's music, he said, "This is where the soul of man never dies." Mm-hmm. And Howlin' Wolf, along with Charlie Rich, Sam always considered to be the most profound of any of his artists. He and Charlie Rich, as different as they were in their approach to music and their genres and their musical styles, they touched the soul of man.
All right, one more, and this is random. The Prisonaires.
The Prisonaires. When Sam first heard of this quintet, I think it was a quintet, who were in the Tennessee State Prison. They were the beneficiaries of Governor Frank Clements' program to bring prisoners back into life rather than to, have a continual recidivism.
Right.
And Sam said, "Can you imagine how I felt?" Because this exemplified both Sam's social ideals and his musical ideas. It's completely, Just Walking in the Rain is completely different than anything Sam ever recorded, but it is a beautiful example of sort of the ink spot style of harmony singing with gospel inflections, and I think is as great as anything that Sam ever did.
All right. Okay, Peter, one more question with a setup for it. Of course, Sam Phillips in the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, the Blues Hall of Fame, Country Music Hall of Fame, Alabama Music Hall of Fame, and his son, Knox Phillips, continued his musical legacy in Memphis till his passing. And to this day, Sam's son, Jerry, and granddaughter, Hallie, with the Sam Phillips Recording Studio and Memphis International Records, and also in radio with Big River Broadcasting. The last question, do you think Sam realized at the time of the rise of Sun Records and eventually WQLT Radio that he was literally, do you think he realized he was creating music history at the time?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, Sam, in his very first interviews in 1951 with the Memphis Press Scimitar and the Commercial Appeal, and he did another great interview in Florence. I can't remember the name of the paper, but in any case, in those very first interviews, he spoke of the way in which music was going to conquer and break down all the categories, all the divisions, among people. It would be the greatest force of ever. And he believed to his soul that Rocket 88, which, as you say, has often been considered, the first rock and roll song, he believed that was going to be the song, essentially, to create rock and roll. I mean, rock and roll wasn't named, but he believed it would break down all those divisions and be a huge pop hit. Now, it sold over 100,000 copies, so it was a huge hit, but it did not sell over the counter to a wide audience. But in every single thing he did, Sam wasn't thinking of the present moment. He was always thinking ahead. He was always thinking of the future. It was one of the most remarkable things, about him. And it was the thing that I first took away from our first meeting. I was just so flabbergasted that he was able to verbalize so many of the things that, I don't know, that perhaps that I hoped for, wished for, wanted, but had never really put together before. And he did that to the end. I mean, he saw radio was his first love. Radio was what he came back to. But he dedicated himself 100% to everything he did with the idea of its impact, not just on the present, but on the future.
Very awesome. I guess I do have one more question. Where can we get these books of yours? The one on Sam Phillips and the latest.
Well, I Amazon or local bookstores. The local bookstores are all. What's the bookstore that started in Florence? I mean, Sam just loved that bookstore. It was downtown, and then it became a chain. But in any case, I mean, when he took us around Florence when we were making the documentary, that was one of the places he pointed out that he loved going there, along with I think it was the circuit court or something, where he would go to the court to listen to the great lawyers. He named them, and I can't remember their names at this point, but listen to the rhetoric, just as he listened to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. To him, that was the greatest speech he'd ever heard, and it was in line with the kind of legal arguments, or, the great rhetoric he had heard from so many people over the years, from preachers and from lawyers, and then I Have a Dream, he just could never stop talking about.
Peter Guralnick, author of Sam Phillips, the man who invented rock and roll. Thank you so much. It's been more than a pleasure.
Oh, it's been great. I just have to get back to Florence. I'm always a would-be Florentine. I may not have made it, but I may never make it, but I'm going to keep trying.
Well, come on, sir. We'll buy you a ticket.
Beyond that, though, we've got to meet in Clarksdale, which is one of my favorite places to meet. Where the Delta Blues Museum is doing such a great job of recalling the history and bringing it to life.
All right. Well, good luck with that, and I hope you enjoy yourself. And thank you, Peter Guralnick. Pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Well, I hope to see you soon.